This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Mayor Dickinson of Wallingford. And we've just met, and I'm going to ask him the obvious question. Do you have a sense of how many of your high school graduates go on to higher education?
I believe it's in the neighborhood of around 50%.
That's good. Is it going up or down?
I think it's been fairly stable. Don't hold me to these figures. I mean,
Okay,
they're
okay.
impressions, but we're certainly try to encourage more
Right.
education. Clearly, the downturn of the economy and a multitude of factors influences
Right.
what people
Well,
want to do. But I think very often those who don't plan on school, I've seen, then begin taking courses at Middlesex or a number of other schools where they recognize they need to
Well, I
develop
did a
some
little
skills.
homework on the way, and 600 people from Wallingford alone, 600 people, are currently in a community college, which may be a little
Excellent.
more than your listeners would expect. 600 is pretty good. Of them, about 2/3 go to Gateway in New Haven, 1/3 come to Middlesex. So probably they would know more about Gateway than Middlesex. Middlesex is smaller, more intimate. Gateway obviously has some more programs, and I suppose you have students going on to University of Connecticut, and
Yes.
which is the closest of the CSUs? Central? Would Central be closest?
Well,
New Britain? Or Southern?
Southern probably, being right in New Haven, is probably a little closer, but Central certainly would be another option.
So the unpleasant question, I guess, these days is what's the unemployment rate in Wallingford? Do you have a sense?
It's 8 to 9%. So that's a real concern. I mean, typically we have been less than the state average at 4% or so, but it's certainly has climbed, and we're in the same
And for those-
basket as everyone.
Yeah, and for those who aren't in Wallingford, what's the main industry?
Well, we really have a diverse situation. We still have manufacturing. We have Ulbrich Steel. We have Nucor Steel. Allegheny Ludlam is
Well,
here.
we'll-
A number of plants like that. We also have Bristol Myers Squibb Pharmaceutical.
So we'll talk about that in a minute. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, and we'll be back momentarily. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Mayor William Dickinson of Wallingford. And I got to ask you, I've never been a mayor. I mean, how long have you been a mayor of Wallingford?
Well, as long as you won't tell anyone, since 1984.
Okay, well, I'm still going to ask my next question. Obviously, if you've been a mayor since 1984, you know where all the bodies are buried in Wallingford, and probably the surrounding communities too. But looking back to the 80s, what was your biggest surprise?
Well, I think the biggest surprise was the complexity of government and its delivery of services. In Wallingford, we have not only the usual services that every community supplies, education, public safety, public works, etc. But we have 3 utilities: water, sewer, and electric service. So they are extremely important to the people in the community. Obviously,
Sure.
The supply of water, the sanitary disposal of waste, and then electricity. Modern society comes to a grinding halt with the termination of electricity.
Sure.
So that's a big responsibility, and we take it all seriously. But I think in becoming mayor and recognizing all of the different expertises and disciplines and service deliveries involved, was
So
certainly.
if something goes
eye-opening.
wrong, the mayor gets blamed, right?
Well,
even if it's not
that's-
his fault.
Well, that's someone's got to be
Yeah.
accountable. But in town, the mayor is the chief elected official on the administrative side of government. There's no city manager, so
Okay.
the mayor is the executive branch, or represents the executive branch of government. We have a town council that is the legislative branch. 9 people.
So you are
elected to the
basically
town
running a complex town of what, 40,000 people approximately?
council. 45 to 46,000. But I participate in the delivery of services. I don't like to say I'm running the town, because it requires much more than one person to accomplish.
Well, let's hope you don't get phone calls just because I said you run the town. But I'm talking with the mayor of Wallingford, and obviously you have a say in most major things that go on in the town.
That's correct.
I would think. So I asked you what your major surprise was, and you said the complexity of things. You've been a mayor since 1984. How has the job changed?
Well, it has changed with ever increasing specialization and complexity. And what at times is surprising to me is that the issues at the local level often have a direct mirror at the state level, and even at times it appears at the national level. Ultimately, everything comes down to communication and the ability to communicate, articulate what is a direction and a policy, and having people believe that is a good direction for them, and ultimately everyone works together. It's critical to what happens. And when stress comes into the equation, as we can now see with the economy, that direction and that communication becomes ever more important. So at the local level, you expect, the mayor talks with people in the town, and there's the council meetings, or some towns still have town meetings where everyone goes and talks. You expect that, but increasingly we're seeing that approach at the state level and even the national level, where presidential candidates and presidents
Go to town
are meeting.
meetings.
Right,
Yeah.
they're going to town meetings. It tells you a lot of the basics have not changed. The basics remain the same. It's just that we require ever more diligence in meeting new challenges.
So if you need to communicate something specific to the citizens, in the old days, I suppose you'd go on radio or you talk to the newspaper, something like that. Do you use electronic means of communication
really
these
don't.
days?
I really
Okay.
don't. Right. I really feel that the best way of communicating is directly, and with the proliferation of so many different forms of communication, I'm not sure it's improved communication.
Yeah.
In some ways, I think it has really had a negative effect on good communication. So the more people can actually know that it's you, and deal with basics that reach everyone, not the pockets. One listens to Twitter and one listens to Facebook and one blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Most people will listen to radio. Most people watch television. And certainly going to
So
a
if
public
you-
meeting is
So
the
if you
best.
have a message, let's say your message is that Middlesex Community College is wonderful, or whatever the message is, you want to get it out fairly soon. What do you do? Do you call up the radio station and ask for time, or do you go on television, or do you wait for a council meeting? What comes to mind?
Short of it being an emergency, a council meeting certainly is the one mechanism. Another mechanism would hold a press conference with radio or with newspaper, and radio and television could be added to that. But typically, we rely more upon the newspapers and perhaps the broadcast through the government channel here in town of meetings where issues will
So
be
how often
discussed.
does the town council,
Twice a month.
and you obviously go to those,
Yes.
and
Yes.
but every town is different. You don't chair it, I assume.
No, I do not chair it. It's a council meeting. There's chairman of the council who runs the meeting, and I'm there as a participant when needed to address issues.
But if you want to make a statement to the town, can you get on the agenda in a reasonable kind of way?
Typically, no. I don't use it for that purpose, but often whatever the announcement might be involves action that is necessary relative to the council. A motion needs to be passed, money needs to be appropriated. At budget time, certainly there are occasions where we have public hearings, and then the budget is discussed at the public hearing, at which time I do make a statement. So, depending upon the nature of what the issue might be, the opportunity is always there.
And I assume the major part of the biggest single item on the town budget, in the town budget, is the schools, isn't it? The public schools.
Absolutely. Approximately 2/3 of our budget is public education. So our budget is something like $145 million, without counting utilities.
Right.
That's just general government, $145 million. So that's the side of town business that, if you equate it to other business, it's a big business.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's labor
yes.
intensive, because most of our services are performed by individuals, whether it's
whether
police
it's teachers
officer,
or police
firefighter,
yeah.
right? It's a person performing a labor-intensive.
Now, how
act.
much control do you have as mayor over the public schools budget, good or bad?
Well,
Yeah.
The mayor's office proposes a budget. The council takes up the budget, holds a public hearing, and ultimately a budget is adopted. At that point, certainly I have influence on what the amount of money will be for education, but after that, once the Board of Education receives the money, the mayor's office really does not control how the money is spent.
So they have what I would call a block grant.
But
They might be happy with it, they might not, but they have a lump sum,
Right.
and they have to do their bargaining with unions and deciding on salary, all that kind of stuff within that block grant. Am I simplifying too much?
No, there's a sum of money, and that is what is meant to fund education for that year. It's a one-year budget.
Okay. Now, if the school board, say, wants to replace a roof or even build a building, that requires a special appropriation, doesn't it?
It typically requires an ordinance to be adopted that would allow borrowing of funds, because typically those projects are very expensive. We just funded $72 million worth of renovations to 11 of our 12 public schools. We have 8 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools. 11 out of the 12 received significant renovations, $72 million. The state is reimbursing us on that to approximately 47% of it.
Right.
But
Right.
the balance is all local taxpayer.
And presumably when times are tight, as they are today, that's harder to get through than, I can't even remember when times were flush, but I guess they
Right.
were at one time.
No, it's increasingly difficult to deal with increases. I mean, we never talk about cutting the amount of money that was spent the prior year. It's a question of how much it goes up. So are we talking about a 3% increase, a 4%, a 5%? I believe the Board of Ed is suggesting a approximately 5% increase, which will be very difficult to achieve given what the economy is, and really no increase in the money coming from the state.
Now, the bargaining with unions, does that come out of the mayor's office or the council?
It is handled administratively, comes out of the mayor's office. Some of the education employees are just Board of Education teachers, for instance. The certified they have full control of it. All other bargaining units ultimately fall under the auspices of the personnel department of the town.
This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, and we'll be back momentarily. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Mayor William Dickinson of Wallingford. He's been a mayor since 1984, so he knows everything there is to know about being a mayor.
Don't say that.
I'm fascinated. Well, I'll say it. Yes,
I'm always learning. The one constant, or a couple of constants in life, but one is you have to continue to always learn. When you stop learning, you're in trouble.
Okay, well, I hope young people who are listening to us hear that. You really have to be learning, or older people too. You have to be learning all the time, and that's a wonderful segue into education. We've been talking about high school graduates.
Yeah,
You just told me what the percentage is of high school graduates who go on to higher education. It's phenomenal.
I said earlier it was too low. It's really 85.5% are going on to education of one type or another. But it's very important. It goes to show to be productive and look forward to a career, you really need to pay attention to what you know. Programming the brain is absolutely the most important thing you can do.
Yeah. And it'd be interesting to look at how many of that 85% come back to Wallingford. My guess is that the people who go to a community college probably come back, return at a higher rate than people who go on to UConn or wherever. But 85%, let's repeat it for our listeners, 85% is very impressive. You were talking about the industries you have in town. What would be the largest employer?
Actually, it I believe is probably Masonic Hospital. Would be one of the larger ones.
Yeah.
We have Gaylord Hospital here and Masonic Hospital. Certainly, Bristol Myers Squibb is a large employer. Cytec Industries at one time was very large, and they're a plastics manufacturer. They're smaller now, but we have a good presence of manufacturing and heavier industry, and that is where I think as a state we're missing the boat. I don't believe our economy is going to recover if we do not spend time really identifying manufacturing as a critical component in our economy.
Making things, yeah.
Making things produces value. It's as old an equation as the history of mankind. The colonial period, England wanted to manufacture, the colonies were produced raw materials.
Right.
England didn't want the colonies manufacturing.
And I used to be an Englishman, so be careful what you say.
But we took off as an economy. This country was built upon manufacturing, and now we're suffering because that manufacturing is moving elsewhere. Well, the lifeblood of manufacturing is low-cost energy. Without low-cost energy, the equation is broken.
Right.
Others can compete much better than you can. So right now, we're not competing well, and my belief is one of the components of that is our energy is priced too high.
Electricity in particular.
Electricity particularly. There's too much speculation. There's a congressional report in 2006 where the Subcommittee of Congress on Homeland Security produced a report that looked into the high cost of oil. And their conclusion was that speculation, futures buying, was having a negative effect on oil, and said we must do something about this. Our rules are that if anything beyond supply and demand is having a substantive effect upon the cost, then we have to deal with it. Nothing's been done since 2006. Oil becomes one of the primary cost drivers for natural gas. Natural gas and oil kind of work in tandem. Right. Oil becomes part of the whole cost structure for production of electricity. Many plants are burning natural gas. Natural gas is tied to oil. The price goes through the roof. Right now, Connecticut has the second highest cost of electricity in continental United States. And then we wonder why we can't get major businesses to Connecticut. Our energy is priced too high.
Yeah.
Wallingford has been somewhat successful because right now we have the lowest cost of electricity in the state because we buy it as a municipal entity through the Connecticut Electric Energy Municipal Cooperative, and our prices are very low. At one point, we were the lowest in New England. We're able to hold on to some of these things. if we don't begin addressing these things both as a state and a nation, I don't see where the economy is going to improve. It'll stabilize, but it'll stabilize at a lower, less healthy, vital level than it had been previously. That I think is something that has to be dealt with. Instead, we just constantly add on to the cost of electricity and wonder why good things don't happen.
You were saying before that the unemployment rate in Wallingford is about 8%. Did I get that right?
Yes,
yeah.
8 plus.
8+%. What can a mayor do about unemployment in a town?
Not a great deal.
Apart from being very aware of it.
Yeah, not a great deal. Certainly, we try to make people aware of where they can receive job training and make efforts to see that they're connected with state offices that help people to find employment.
Right.
But our dilemma is we're trying to cut back on what the cost is through taxes for people who live here. Well, if you start programs, you have to fund them, and that's funding
dilemma,
is going to come from taxes. So there's not a lot that can be done at the local level to provide employment.
So right now, as we speak, we're obviously in very troubled times. We have unemployment, we have the economy, and some would say still in recession, some say we're coming out of it. On the one hand, and on the other hand, locally, we've had a terrible winter. As a practical matter, which do you get more phone calls on? Do you get more phone calls, on snow issues and cleaning the roads, that kind of thing? Or do you get more phone calls on you've got to lower the taxes somehow, you've got to help the unemployed, those kinds of things? Yeah. Which do you get more calls on, would you say?
By far the most calls would be about snow removal and the plowing, or
I feared that
failure to plow, or right.
And people expect the mayor himself to be on every street at 6 a.m. Yeah.
Well, often they'll call the department, but if they are dissatisfied with the answer they've received, or someone didn't get back to them, they call the mayor's office. And in that way, the mayor kind of acts as an ombudsman. There's a nice old term where you're a liaison between government and the public to try to sort out the difficulty and arrive at a
So I guess the moral is mayors probably shouldn't take winter vacations in Florida for too long.
I never have. There's some truth to that, because people want to feel like someone is there to deal with what they are.
So you've been a mayor
from.
Since 1984. Let's assume you're going to be mayor for another however long.
Well, do we have to assume that?
Well, for the purposes of the discussion, sure.
All right, just for this discussion.
For this discussion. What issues do you think will be crossing the mayor's desk in the next 5 years, looking a number of years out? Not next month, next year, but 5 years out, 10 years out.
Well, at this point, I think it's the basics, that some of which I've mentioned. I think it's going to continue to be employment. I think it's going to continue to be energy issues, the balancing of environmental concerns against what may be a need for a healthier economy. There are a lot of good ideas about what to do, but the difficulty is we can't have everything that we want. Right. And I think that's going to be a major adjustment for our society. For quite a few years, we've kind of felt like you can have anything you want. I'm not sure that's going to be
hard. What's
going to be the case. And the big difference that we're facing now, from my perspective, is that in the past, the United States has been the manufacturer.
Yeah, now it
sure
isn't.
We have a whole new part of the globe that is an active, very effective competitor. That's never been the case before. We've been it.
I hope very much that your local community college, Middlesex Community College, is going to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And I hope that after they've been listening to us, people will be interested in at least looking at options at their local community college. This has been Middlesex Moments, and my guest has been Mayor Dickinson of Wallingford. Take a look at our website, mxcc.comnet.edu. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College. Have a good day.